Hi, I'm Cynthia DeLorenzi, back with another incredible episode, a very special episode of Wheresmj called Closing the Gap. And we have two incredible guests here today, Victor Hartuda. Did I say that right?
It's Hurtado.
Hurtado. And then we've got Blake Althen. But we're going to do something a little bit different today because they're both specialists and professionals in their own field of music, which is one of the things we're talking about today is the music scene in Washington, D.C. We're going to ask them to engage in a conversation like you listen in on the pros talk, and maybe you'll learn something new if you're interested in the music scene.
I've never had the military call me up and ask me for a production, and I take it they just didn't randomly call one day, or did they?
They did randomly call one day. I was in Santa Barbara, which is where I grew up the second half of my life, and my cell phone rang, and it was one of the producers at Army Entertainment had been following my body of work and knew that I was a veteran. And
I was going to say, but you were a veteran.
Yeah, and knew what I had done while I was in the Army and the programs that I had started. And they needed a director for a touring show.
Wow. So they just called up and did you immediately have a roster, or you were just tour managing at that point? Like you thought, I got this guy in the military?
No. I mean, it was something that was already in place. As a matter of fact, this was January. The tour was to start in April. And I had no idea who the artists were. So they flew me to New York and they showed me some tapes of some of the talent in the Army. And I'd been working with people like Boyz II Men and Kenny Loggins and all of these people. So I had a little bit of a different threshold. And when I saw the tapes, I thought, so show me the people I'm going to be working with, really, that I've got to get together in 6 weeks. Right. And they said, well, this is it. And I said, well, I've signed the contract already, haven't I? So now I'm going to have a challenge. And yeah, but I took on the challenge, and it was supposed to be for 3 months. That was it.
Right, but it wasn't, obviously. So
it wasn't. It wasn't.
When was that? When was that?
2001. Yeah.
Pre-September 11th?
Well, that's an interesting thing. Is I was just contracting with the Army. I came in as a director and directed the show. Went back to Santa Barbara again to mind my own business, and they asked me to come. They asked me if I would take a position for a while, a government position, to have some continuity and become sort of an in-residence director. And so I agreed, and my first day of work was to be September 11th. Fly into National
right.
Overnight on the 10th, be in on the 11th, go over and get my ID. So I would have been in the Pentagon when the plane hit. But so what happened is they didn't sign the orders in time, and so the travel agency, there's all that red tape. So this is the one time when red tape really helped. And the travel agency wouldn't issue my ticket until somebody signed this little piece of paper. So I said, well, I'll just fly out tomorrow night, and I'll be there on the 12th. September 11th, I woke up in Santa Barbara. I'm watching TV, and I think I'm watching HBO
on every channel.
Cinemax and on every channel, yeah. So all of my paperwork for my Army job says hired September 11th, 2001.
Wow.
Done. Everybody was so afraid of flying, And so what do I have to do? The first thing I have to do is less than 2 weeks after September 11th, when everybody's still scared of flying. I've got to fly to Washington, D.C., get signed in, sign all my paperwork, and then fly on that very short flight from Washington, D.C. to Seoul, Korea.
Was it 20 hours?
Yeah, with a tank full of gas, which is what everybody was afraid of. You don't want to, And that was my very first thing that I had to do, and I met my troops over in Seoul, Korea, the same troops that I had directed in the show that in January. So I hadn't seen them for months. So I met them in Korea. They came in, and we continued on with our mission.
Interesting you say troops. Like I know when I've worked with bands, I always say my guys. Now, do you say your troops about these guys, or do you say about the 4 troops?
Well, actually, all of the 4 troops had come. Had worked with me in the service in one way or the other. So they were, I still said that they were my soldiers, because when you're in a director position, they hand them over to you, and so you're their commander.
I was going to say, what's it like producing them? Because it's, I have to sometimes. Are you more like a commander when you produce?
You are. I was that guy. Frank Filippetti, who produced Barbra Streisand and Elton John and all these people, is the one that was the producer on the entire record, and so and I was the other producer. So I was the one that really had to kind of get them together, because they'd never sung as a group. And when you put a group together that has never worked together, there's other things to get around. There's dynamics. Some learn quicker than the others, and there's a lot of money being spent, and there's contracts and all that stuff. So it was really interesting. So I was more like I think I was more like the sergeant major than the commander.
Not the drill sergeant.
Not the drill sergeant. I had to stop myself because when they were my soldiers, I wasn't, tough and ugly about things, but I was able to speak to them in a different way, or I had a non-commissioned officer in charge to say, hey, so-and-so's not acting right, and I could just walk away, and then they would just come in and take care of it, and I'd magically have a nice, clean, beautiful troop again.
Because I imagine producing, and I always think of like, all right, let's do it one more time. Can you do a little more of this? And
no, because of their experience and what they had done, Frank was just blown away, Frank Filippetti, because they were so professional. They actually said thank you when they were corrected or a note was given, and then they would correct it. And he says, I have never, ever worked with artists that actually thank you instead of getting an attitude or rolling their eyes or saying, what do you mean?
I don't sing it like that.
Yeah, and especially this new group who's signed in such a big way,
That was pretty cool. How you got it signed to, they're distributed by Sony now, is it?
They're not distributed by Sony, they're signed by Sony.
Signed to Sony,
They're publicists, everybody's Sony, and the agency group is our agent. So it's an actual Sony project, not just a Sony distributed project.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, my job, gentlemen, is to be the referee here. This has been fascinating to sit in and listen to your conversation. I've got a million questions which I'm going to ask you, inflecting my tie to Seoul, Korea. My brother-in-law was stationed over there at the time, so we're going to talk about that for a second off the air. You don't get to hear this. We'll be back shortly. This is Closing the Gap for Wheresmj.
Where exactly is MJ?